Thank you, and thank you for a warm welcome back to British Columbia. A number of years ago, I did a couple of workshops over a period of time in Prince Rupert with First Nations economic developers, and that was my experience in British Columbia up till today. So I'm happy to be here with you in Kelowna and to hear the number of stories you've been sharing about the kinds of collaboration you're building for economic success. Gordon asked me to share some stories of community success with you today, and I've selected two communities in Nebraska to talk with you about. One, by Nebraska standards, is a big community. It's Ord, Nebraska. Population is 2,200. And in a county of about double that size in the central part of our state. And the other one is a very small community, Pilger, Nebraska, population about 350. And what I'm going to share with you are two stories, very different stories about these two communities, both of which have to do with transformation and resilience. In one case, the transformation was planned over a very long period of time from a very strategic, deliberately selected strategic outlook, and the other transformation took place very quickly, and when we get to that part, you'll see why it had to happen right away. So let me start with, let's see, the big green arrow. Okay. So I'm going to start with Ord in Valley County, Nebraska. You can get a sense of where it is. Nebraska communities, the ones that typically are thought to have the best chances for survival or success, are those that are located proximate to a regional economic development center on an interstate highway, or surrounded by the right kinds of natural resources, and I'll share some more about that with you tomorrow morning. Ord, as you can see, has none of those advantages, basically. We began working with community leaders in Ord almost 20 years ago. Ord had gone through a long-time transformation that wasn't very positive. What I'm going to use as a framework for this is something that I call the hierarchy of community impacts. And this is an evaluation model that I invented to help community leaders figure out if they were making a difference. And at the foundation are activities. So since I do a lot of leadership training, my example is usually leadership development. You start a leadership development program, okay? The outputs, you enroll some people in the program and they graduate, okay? And you move on up this pyramid to what I call indicators of systemic change. And what I'm going to try to share with you today about Ord is how they moved up to that pyramid over, again, about 2 decades. So it's been a very long-term development process in this community. And I'm going to share with you what I think are some of the indicators of systemic change that are beginning to appear in this community. I want to talk to you a little bit about population. Ord has been in a depopulation state of affairs since 1920. 1920 census was when they experienced their highest population. And since then, they've been in decline just in terms of number of people who live in the community, and this is true of the county as a whole. And what you're seeing here are county figures. So you can see that decline has continued over that long period of time and is continuing today, although we are beginning to see some evidence of potential growth. Finally, after this period of nearly a century, really. So the population countywide right now is about 4,200, and as I say, the county seat is about half that size. So they're still working on how to attract new young families to come to their community, and I'll be interested to hear the session this afternoon that's going to tell us all how to do that. Here's a little bit better indicators of transformative change. Since 1970, they've begun to see a reasonably significant increase in employment in their community, as you can tell from this data. That increase has been modest, but it's continuing, and it's the kind of thing that community leaders are looking at to try to determine if they're on the right track or not. Another indicator of transformative change is how personal income has been impacted by what they've been doing, and I'm going to go through this data and then I'm going to tell you what they've been doing, okay? So personal income has increased again somewhat significantly over this period of time. Here are some other indicators that I think may have even more telling success indicators. Their federal adjusted gross income over this period of time is up about 20%. The state average is 56, so they're still behind the growth in the state, but at least it's growing. And that wasn't happening for a very long period of time. Property tax valuations are also on the upswing. Again, in this case, fairly significantly in the county seat itself, as well as county-wide. Okay, I want to go back. So now I want to tell you a little bit about how they did this. We, meaning in this case, 3 nonprofits that have worked together a lot in Nebraska. In addition to the Heartland Center for Leadership Development, we've worked a lot, Mark, with the Nebraska Community Foundation and with the Center for Rural Entrepreneurship. About 20 years ago, these 3 organizations came up with what we thought was a new approach to rural community development that we called hometown competitiveness. And the idea was to figure out how to help small towns become competitive in a global economy. So this is echoing some of what Mark was talking about this morning, I think. What we did was to take a look at controllable contingencies. That is, what small town leaders could control themselves. And we said, let's figure out what key controllable contingencies there might be that community leaders could focus on with a real significant effort over time. We approached community leaders in Valley County and we said pretty much in this way, we have this new idea we want to try out somewhere. Do you want to be our first community partner to see if it works or not? And after a period of negotiation, shall we say, the folks in Valley County said, yeah, we'll try that. So the focus of hometown competitiveness was on 4 strategic areas of activity: entrepreneurial, economic development, youth engagement, leadership development, and community philanthropy. And what we said to leaders in this county was, we think if you can focus on those 4 areas of effort over a period of time, and we said we think this is going to take a long time, it's going to make a transformative difference in your community. So they started a leadership program, okay? They began to look very deliberately at the local base for raising an endowment through a charitable foundation to have their own money to play with, rather than begging for money from the state or other distant organizations or other big foundations. They said, let's build our own capacity right here. They started working heavily with youth, middle school, actually elementary, middle school, high school age youth in their community. And most of the focus of that was teaching kids what it would be like to start and own their own business. And then the community leaders who had spent years trying to recruit outside industry said, let's focus on the people who are already here in business right now. Let's figure out what they need to help them grow, instead of spending all of our time traipsing around to industrial fairs trying to convince other people to come to our little town. So they came up with a strategic focus on those 4 overall objectives. They have now had about 2,500 people go through a leadership program. They started out with a pretty rudimentary program that we helped them develop, and they went through several classes of that. Then they said, we need a graduate course. So they hired a university professor from Minnesota, actually, to help them develop their graduate course in leadership development. And now they're putting folks through that course of study. They got kids, as I say, including as young as grade school, to figure out what it meant to own their own business. I talked to a young man in Ord one day, I think it was around 11 years old, and this was at an entrepreneurial fair that the kids had helped organize. They got the radio station to give them public service ads, and then they put on this fair, and so it was like booths around the town square. And I went and talked to this young man, and so what are you selling? He said, I'm selling golf balls. I said, where do you get the golf balls? He says, I go through the weeds out at the golf course. Okay. And so I said, how's it working? And he said, well, pretty good. He picked one ball out of a basket, and he said, I've sold this one 5 times. Okay. It was working for him, you know. Hey, buddy said, I think I may retire it and just save it. As they were working with their local business owners, they found out that a lot of those folks could use pretty simple help: bookkeeping, market development, becoming better managers. So they began to work with those entrepreneurs, and they've grown the base of home-owned business, or not home-owned, but I mean businesses owned by people in their community significantly. And then when it came to community philanthropy, the way the Nebraska Community Foundation works, it's not a granting foundation. They help communities develop foundations, basically. With the help of the statewide foundation, we helped Ord Valley County develop its own community foundation. And they, over 20 years, went from basically nothing to, they have a $20 million endowment now. So they are funding the strategic objectives that make sense to them with their own foundation. They've really taken over control of their community's future in a very significant way. And They did it again by focusing on local assets. You all may be familiar with asset-based community development that came out of Northwestern University, almost 30 years ago, I think. Mark McKnight and Kretzman. Well, this is a version of asset-based community development that demonstrates that it can make a difference. But it takes a long time. This community was stagnant or in decline for almost 80 years. And in 20 years, we now think they're on the verge of really significant transformative change. You can't do this overnight, is one of the lessons we learned from this. So the other community I want to share with you is Pilger, Nebraska. And I'm going to ask the guys who are helping us with the AV to run this video to show you how Pilger started on the path of transformation. So watch this.
What has helped Pilger survive after the twin tornadoes go through is just the sense of community.
We want to keep Pilger alive.
We're too tough to die, and we will be back bigger and better.
Tonight, we're really trying to get input from young people, older residents, working families. The community's been terribly disrupted, and here's an opportunity to talk about how we would like the community to look in the future.
You know, this is something entirely new to the people of Pilger, and we kind of looked at each other, what do we do now?
The Rural Futures Institute is involved here because we believe this is exactly what it was designed to do, and that is see an individual community, listen to its leaders, and then be a factor in the collaboration of a broad variety of resources to help those leaders build a stronger community.
It's a vision into action exercise. They get to decide in their own words, in their own ways, what to focus on to rebuild and reinvent their own community.
Our group said that fire and rescue services were important.
Housing, apartments, multifamily housing.
Doing something unique to draw outside visitors into our small town.
A variety of businesses, shops, stores.
They would like to see a community center, the fitness center, after-school programs.
We would love to see a preschool with a daycare.
Trees was a big part of it.
Having businesses that would serve and enhance all the recreational opportunities that are around Pilger.
Well, so far on our list, we got Starbucks.
All right.
I like how people are putting their ideas out there.
It is nice to see the different generations.
You want those past generations to have something to come back to and then also to pass on to their kids.
There's a lot more consensus among the people than we think there is. And then we go around the table and we share. We find that we all have many of the same things on our lists.
We believe there is history being written.
We've had to find our sense of community.
As far as the future of Pilger,
Pilger's pretty strong.
We are a strong community tied together.
I love Pilger.
We know that we will be back bigger and better.
We're going to be the community that's too tough to die.
So on the day in June 2014 when two tornadoes went through Pilger at the same time, it destroyed 3/4 of their town. The bank was gone, the co-op was gone, the convenience store was gone, 3/4 of the houses were gone. I mean, literally gone. And about 3 months later, I got a call from Gene Willers, who was pictured there. He was the president of the bank at the time. He actually locked employees and customers in the vault, which was tornado-proof, and he went out and laid down in a ditch. Then he went back and opened up the vault. He got a big hero award for that, deservedly. Gene Willers called me one day and he said, "We got to reinvent our town and we don't know how to do it. Would you help?" Well, it's pretty hard to say no. to a request like that, so I said, sure, I'll do whatever I can to help. And the next day, I was up there talking to Gene and Joe Ferguson, who was pictured there. I took Chuck Schroeder along, who is executive director of the Rural Futures Institute at the University of Nebraska, and Mr. Willard said, what would you advise us to do? I said, I would advise you to get everybody in your community engaged in a very deliberate conversation about what you want to do with your community. So what you saw on that was the evidence of the town hall kinds of meetings that we facilitated. We facilitated 5 of those big meetings. They had to happen in another town because the school was blown away too. There was no place to hold a big meeting in Pilger after the tornadoes. I said on the day the tornadoes came through, the official population was 354. We had an average of 125 people attend each of those town hall meetings. And what we did was say, you decide how you want to revitalize your community. They said, we want to reinvent it. I said, well, then reinvent it. So we helped them put together 8 task forces. Give you a couple of examples. The bank said it would rebuild right away. It's a family-owned bank, and it's a local family. They announced they were going to rebuild. The co-op said they were going to rebuild, and they were going to do that on their own, but they didn't. The co-op said, we don't want to have a convenience store anymore. We don't want to run it. So one of the task forces was the convenience store task force. One of them was restoring the school. They didn't get that done. The Consolidated School District decided not to rebuild a school in that community. And then that task force became the Community Center Task Force. And we helped them raise $2.5 million to build a new community center and an operating endowment for that center. And now it is the meeting place not only for Pilger, but for people in a fairly wide area. The Convenience Store Task Force found a developer. They put together local investors to finance the convenience store, have the capital for that. They now have a really nice convenience store that's partly grocery as well. They have a lot of food stuff there, including a big frozen meat locker. The rebuilding housing is a bit of a struggle yet in this community because a lot of people moved away. Population of Pilger today is about 250. It's growing a little bit all time, but it's not back even to where it was the day the tornadoes came through, but they lost, as I say, about 3/4 of their houses, but they've built 12, or now I think it's 15 new houses, and they've replaced the property tax base that they lost when all those old houses got blown away because the new houses are worth a lot more, right? Many of those houses are in a floodplain, and so they have to meet floodplain standards. Either they have to be stilted or they have to be built a foot higher than the floodplain and then have a flow through under the floor to the slab that the house is built on. So they've become pretty creative. A lot of the new houses have tornado shelters in them, by the way. These people feel really good about the success pathway they're on. Now, Pilger's never going to be as big as Ord, I don't think. They'll never get to 2,200 people in this community. But it's a community that has a really strong family history and heritage. People are really proud of their community. They want it to be there 50 years from now. You know, you build a public building, it's supposed to last for 50 years. So they think that community center will be there for 50 years. When we started the Heartland Center during the farm crisis in the 1980s. One of our mentors was a regional historian named Robert Manley. Bob Manley was pretty popular. He not only taught history at the university, but he had a very popular public television show as well. Dr. Manley's scholarly interest was community building on the Great Plains. His question was, how did people come out here in the 1800s, look across this vast plain? On the maps, it was called the Great American Desert at the time. How did they picture communities, and then how did they build them? That was Manley's focus in his research. And what he concluded was community building on the Great Plains was a function of two things. It was a combination of vision and persistence. And I think what we see in both of these stories in very different ways is how communities, if they envision what they want to be, and then are very persistent about making that come true, they can produce transformative change that can result in long-term success. So those are the two quite varied stories I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.